Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and this morning we're visiting with Becky Harling, author of the newly released book, How to Listen So People Will Talk. Becky, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Rabbi Eric. It's great to be here with you. I'm excited.
Thank you so much. Becky is a certified speaker, leadership coach, and trainer with the John Maxwell team. She speaks nationally and internationally at conferences, retreats, and training events. The founder of Moms Unleashed and author of several books, including Rewriting Your Emotional Script, the 30-Day Praise Challenge, and the 30-Day Praise Challenge for Parents. She's been a guest on Daystar Television Network, The Harvest Show, Moody's Midday Connection, and Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. Becky and her husband, Steve, president of Reach Beyond, make their home in Colorado Springs, Colorado. You're a prolific writer. You and your husband are in full-time ministry. You served at the pastoral level, living in parsonage and ministering to families. You have written all these books. Was this your desire in your youth to be a writer?
You know, that's such a great question. No other interviewer has asked me that yet. I grew up and I loved reading. And so as a little girl, I can remember sneaking a flashlight in my bed to read books at night, after my parents would put me to bed. And then in college, I just began to read a lot of Christian women authors. And so I really wanted to do that when I got out of college. I graduated with a double degree, a degree in Bible and elementary education. And so as I fell in love with teaching God's Word, then I just wanted to start writing. I don't really consider myself, though, a prolific writer. I have friends who are prolific writers who have written like 45 books or more, but I do love what I do.
It's interesting that you would go to college and major in elementary education and the Bible. What college did you go to?
I went to a very small Bible college in New Jersey. It has gone under since that time, so it was called Northeastern Bible College at the time. And I double majored so that I could teach in elementary school, but my real love was the Bible.
How interesting. Now, this is where you met your husband, Steve.
Yes.
Now, was that love at first sight? Was that...
No, actually, he was the head of, we had different prayer bands where we were supposed to pray over different parts of the world, and he was in charge of Africa because he grew up there, and I was also on that leadership team, and there was another guy asking me out, and I didn't want to go out with that other guy, and so I just ended up in a really long conversation with my future husband, who then began calling all these meetings and then eventually asked me out as well. So it was a lot of fun. We have a crazy story.
How wonderful. That's very, very exciting. Now, you have how many children with Steve?
We have 4 children who are all married now, and we have 10 grandchildren. And grandchildren are the dessert at the end of a long dinner. Our kids, they're really the best part of us. We didn't know what we were doing as parents, but our kids are truly amazing. I can honestly say that. And they're great kids. They're raising great kids. They love God, and they love what they do, and they still love us, which is remarkable, I always think. So
well, that's very exciting. And you have one on the way.
Yeah, we have another grandchild on the way.
Yes,
that'll be number 11.
How exciting. Now, when you were raising your children, how was that the same or different than you were raised?
Very different. I have really a very messy story. I grew up in a Christian home, but a very legalistic Christian home. A lot of rules. I always say, we had more rules than most people have in a lifetime. And while from the outside, our home looked perfect, on the inside it was anything but perfect. And so sexual abuse is a part of my story. While my dad was preaching Jesus on Sunday, he was sexually abusing me during the week. And so that had a profound impact on my ability to trust God as an adult. And just on my emotional script as a little kid. And so when I became a parent, Steve and I talked a lot about rules. Do we give the kids a lot of rules? Do we not? And we actually, we just prayed every step of the journey because we wanted to offer our children something better than what I had. And something that was really important to me was I wanted my kids to know every night when they went to bed that I loved them and that I believed in them and that I thought they were going to grow up to be the most remarkable people and that God loved them. And I didn't want them to grow up with all the baggage that I had grown up with.
So that was very intentional on your part.
Yeah, it was. And yet, I have to say, I didn't really deal with the sexual abuse until well into my parenting journey. I just knew in my heart that I didn't want to offer my kids the same type of legalistic background that I had grown up with.
Well, that takes a lot, especially with them being pastors' kids and you having kind of living in a glass house.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the churches we served were very gracious to us, which I'm thankful for. There was one church in upstate New York that we basically raised our kids in, and I remember that the kids loved the church because there was a gym. So when we were talking to people on Sunday after services, they could go shoot baskets in the gym or hang out with their friends. And if people put too much pressure on our kids, we tried to address that. We tried to explain that our kids were not perfect and we didn't expect them to be.
Well, I think that's fair and reasonable of you. There's all kinds of challenges, of course. I think kids are designed to test the boundaries, to expand and to push the walls, kind of like those movable walls that kind of move in and then you try to push them back in the hero movies. It's a kid's responsibility.
Yeah.
It's also their responsibility to be somewhat divisive in coming between mom and dad and seeing what they can parlay into their own territory.
Yeah, we had one like that. We called her our negotiator.
Right.
We thought for sure she was going to grow up to be a lawyer. She did not. And now, God has a sense of humor because now she has her own little negotiator. And so it's perfect. But, it was really important to us, Eric, that our kids had a voice. Because what we discovered in our journey, just in pastoring communities of families, a lot of parents were more concerned about obedience than they were with their kids really understanding the call of Christ on their life and giving them the ability to express that. And so when our kids had doubts, Steve would invite them to bring their doubts to the dinner table, and we would talk about it. And we wanted to give them a voice, when they were upset because, we wouldn't let them do something. We would say, well, let's talk about it. We want to hear what you have to say because maybe you know something we don't know, And so in the end, it was our decision. But it was really important to us to give our kids a voice because I definitely grew up without a voice.
There's a huge difference. Parents are parents, but there's active parents, engaged parents, and then there's passive parenting.
Yeah.
Kind of in your theme of how to listen so people will talk, there's a difference between passive and active.
Yes.
And that goes with all walks, all across all positions, even our faith. We have many who are passive about their faith and those who are active and engaged. Yeah,
I agree with you. And Jesus calls us to be actively engaged. There's not to be a sideline mentality. And I think that we need to bring that into our parenting, into our family, into the way we listen, And there was a verse in the Old Testament book of Proverbs that I remember Steve and I picked out kind of as a governing verse for our family and how we were going to raise our kids. And it says, by wisdom a house is built. Through understanding, its walls are established. Through knowledge, its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. And we just love that. And so we really wanted to understand our kids and offer them understanding and help them get reestablished. Because, the world knocks our kids down. And as parents, our job is to reestablish them and help them be steady and strong.
You know, as you've watched your children grow and your grandchildren grow, and you talk about the world, the world's changed since the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
Growing up in today's day and age versus when I grew up and you grew up is diametrically different.
Yes.
Bullying, you handled the bully. You stood up to the bully. It's different. We certainly had it, but it's not to the degree it is today. And the weapons that these kids use against each other is absurd. The Facebook posts and the internet and the pictures. It's got to be very, very difficult to raise a young child today. You know, my daughter's 28, so I've got she was just on the verge, just at the turning point of all this technology.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that in a pastoral sense, in having your kids engaged and watching them come up with solutions? I think you develop solutions with them.
I think this is why it's so important to listen to your kids talk and keep them talking. Because if you're not listening as a parent, if you're always distracted, or if as soon as your child opens up, you're correcting them or dumping unmerited advice on them, then they're going to turn to things like the internet to find a voice. They're going to turn to unhealthy ways to find a voice. And the internet is a big part of our culture today. And rather than hiding from it, I think we have to teach kids to be wise with it. And so certainly there's a certain age where kids are old enough to be responsible with Facebook and things like that. And when they're very young, they know about Facebook, but you don't want them to have a Facebook account, right? But I mean, they all know about it. I mean, my grandson the other day said to me, "Hey, Mimi, did you put the picture of me up on Facebook?" Because, I mean, they just all know about it, right? They're growing up in that kind of world. And rather than always bashing the internet and saying it's an awful thing, let's start using it for good. Because for the first time, we have the ability to get a message about God's love out to the world in unparalleled ways. It's remarkable. And so if we raise our kids with a passion for God, we can help them understand, and if we're listening to them, we can help them understand wise ways to use the internet rather than foolish ways.
You know, if you recall, the Encyclopedia Britannica was the thing that we all had, the World Book, in our homes, and each year they would get the supplement, the update, and you had this whole range, and every book report and every project you did for geography class or history class was studying the World Book Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Today, you just key in one word, 2 words, and you've got this wealth of information. It requires a great deal of discernment as to what's real and not real, what's accurate and what's inaccurate. You can look at a 360-degree perspective on any issue.
Yes.
So how did you communicate this to your children, and how are you seeing that passed down to the next generation of your grandchildren?
Yeah, I think what we told our kids is that probably the greatest gift we gave our kids was praying and staying on our knees and asking God for discernment and wisdom, like every day, multiple times a day, day in, day out, in the middle of the night when we didn't know what to do. You know, you ask God for wisdom, and we've taught our kids, you know, God is on your side as a parent. And so ask God for wisdom, and He'll give you that. And it's a joy for us because we're watching our kids do that. You know, I'll go into their homes and they have verses on the walls, and they're teaching their kids to learn verses, and they're praying with their kids, and they're helping their kids have a voice. And again, I want to underscore that because, again, I think the temptation sometimes for Christian parents especially, is to shut down your child's voice because you're so focused on obedience. And you don't want to do that, because then they're going to go underground with things like the internet. So you want to bring that voice out into the open, where you can talk about real issues and real struggles that they're having, and you can listen to them and invite what's in their hearts, so you can help draw that out and then give them guidance and direction. And we've been watching our kids do this, and we've been teaching this to congregations for a number of years.
You know, it's interesting that if you start out foundationally, as your proverb reference says, then it's easy to build from there.
Yeah.
Now, what's the challenge for our viewers who have teenage or adult children, or entering into adult relationships, as this challenge about listening, about talking, about encouraging and developing that voice in others? That applies universally across all age groups.
Yes.
And your crossroad experience came with your own daughter.
Yes, it did. And, honestly, when we had that discussion, I really thought she was going to tell me what a great listener I was. I was kind of ready for reviews, I mean, we had taught other people they should listen to their kids. So I thought, okay, I've really got this nailed, but I'll ask her. So I asked my daughter, hey, honey, how well do you think I listen? And there was a really long pause. And then she said, sometimes you listen well, but she said, you interrupt a lot. When I tell a story, you dive in with your own story. You give me a lot of advice that I didn't even ask for. You interrupt me a lot. Sometimes you're distracted with other things. You're an okay listener, Mom, but not the best. And I remember thinking, oh my word, this is awful. But I'm so glad that she found the courage to say those things, because it changed my life. Because I believe that as followers of Jesus, we need to listen like Jesus and love like Jesus. And that meant that he had to change me. And I think for parents moving into the teen years and the young adult years, the first thing I would say to them is, if you've blown it, apologize to your kids. We sat around with our adult kids. I'll throw this in. I wasn't planning on telling this story, but it came to my mind, so I'll throw it in. We sat around with our adult kids a few years back, and we said, okay, guys, be honest with us. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? So they told us a couple things that we did wrong, and, we apologized for that. And then we said, what did we do right? They said the number one thing you did right was apologize when you did things wrong. And I mean, that really says it all there, because I think a lot of times parents get in power struggles with their kids. And as parents, we're not perfect. You are going to mess up with your kids, but by all means, apologize to them. Just because they're younger than you doesn't mean that they don't deserve an apology. And so, I remember one night getting down on my knees next to my teen daughter's bed and saying, I have really blown it. Will you forgive me? I'm sorry. And asking the question, will you forgive me? That goes a long way to restore relationships.
I think parents are somewhat intimidated by the concept of talking to their children in such an engaging manner, having an open dialogue. They still have this remnant of don't do as I do as I say, and this power struggle for who's in control. And then they rest on the scripture, obedience is better than sacrifice. And so that's why they want to drive to this obedience, because if you can't obey me, how are you going to ever obey God? And so immediately we elevate ourselves into the God role and pass down judgment as if we were sitting on the throne and pouring it out on our children. So I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and Jesus had such a heart for children. He had such a heart for rebels. I mean, if you read through the Gospels, he's so kind to some of the worst sinners, and he's really a lot harder on the religious people.
Well, absolutely. There was no relationship whatsoever with the Pharisees. You never read about a tender Pharisaical moment.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
where the 6-year-old boy comes running up to his dad, and the dad bends down and kneels down so he can see him eye to eye. You don't read that anywhere in Scripture.
Yeah, yeah. But I love that. There's a scripture in the Old Testament that says that God bends down to listen to us, and as he listens to us is the way we're supposed to listen to other people.
Well, you're exactly right. We're talking with Becky Harling, author of the newly released book, How to Listen So People Will Talk, Building Stronger Communications and Deeper Connections. This is not just for parents and children. This is for husbands and wives and friends. It's for you to relate to your parents, to listen to their stories, to encourage them to be engaged with you. Imagine how you might feel if you looked down at your phone and saw that you were on the phone with your grown child for an hour and a half and you barely said 5 words, and all you did was encourage them to tell you more. Those tips, those instructions, those guidelines, how to listen so people will talk, are contained in this newly released book from our friends at Bethany House, a division of Baker Publishing Group. Encourage you to go visit ignitinganation.com right now. Click on Books and Media and order a copy for yourself while we're on the short break. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, We have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Becky Harling, author of the newly released book, How to Listen So People Will Talk. Becky, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you.
Thank
This is
you.
a fun discussion.
I'm so glad you're enjoying it. Now, if you ask the average person if they're a good listener, what do you think their response would be?
You know, I think a lot of people think they're good listeners because we like to think the best about ourselves. But I think a lot of times we lack self-awareness, and that's where a question like, how well do you think I listen, is a very great question to ask people close to you. You know, your spouse, your coworkers, your kids, or your good friends that will dare to be honest with you.
You open the book with the conversation you had with your daughter that you shared with us before break. And then you kind of move into the statement that if you don't have a plan, it's kind of like in business. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Yeah.
So you need to engage in active listening, and you've got to figure out how you're going to approach this if you come to the conclusion that maybe you're not as good a listener as you thought you were. So how does the plan look?
Yeah, I think to develop a plan, what I did is I went to the book of Proverbs, and I discovered in the book of Proverbs that there is a lot of relational wisdom. And then I also began to look at the life of Jesus, and noticed how he had conversations with people. Because here's the deal, 80% of a conversation is really listening. And we forget that. We think 80% of a conversation is talking. And so you have to really study some of this. And so the Bible is a great framework for studying the concept of listening. And so that's where I went. And then I began to pull out certain truths that I wanted to work on.
Excellent. You know, King Solomon had 1,000 wives. I'm sure he had a lot to say about relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. He really probably messed up quite a few times. It's a lot of people to listen to.
It's extraordinary. Now, you made a trip to Nigeria with Steve and
Yes.
visited his prep school.
Yes.
And you describe that experience, and you describe it very eloquently. I could actually feel his right there at the bench where the parents said goodbye to him, and I could feel that moment, empathize because I'd been through a similar experience, but yet your words painted a picture of exactly what that was like. And what I was fascinated by was the time you spent engaged in listening to his stories and just giving him prompts along the way that would then add another piece of wood to the fire.
Yeah. That was just like a remarkable time in our life. we flew into Nigeria, and as I describe in the book, when we drove up onto the campus of the missionary boarding school where Steve was, I had never seen my husband buckle over in sobs before, and he just was crippled, sobbing. And at first it caught me so off guard. I wasn't sure what to do, because my husband is a very strong leader, and I had never seen him like this. And then but he shared that was where his parents had dropped him off. And then we went into the building and we saw the little bunk beds, and he showed me his bunk bed, and he showed me the medicine cabinet, quote unquote, where there was a big black strap where if you got in trouble, you got whipped. And he showed me where the playground where there was a bully in school. And, and then later we sat outside, and I just began to ask him some questions like, what was that like for you? And did you feel like God was here or far away, And just by asking a few questions, Steve began to really open up, and he shared the angst in his own soul of being torn between wanting to change the world and believing in what his parents were doing, and yet having to live so far from his parents in this crazy boarding school that had ridiculous rules of discipline, where he got spanked for everything, and just the angst in his own soul, and he began to just pour out his heart about the fun times of boarding school mixed with the horror of boarding school, and it really gave me a deeper window into my husband's heart. And I realized that sometimes in a marriage relationship, you're focused on schedules, or you're focused on changing the world, or you're focused on parenting together, and you're not necessarily sitting together as a couple and just asking the quiet questions like, how did that shape your faith? How did that shape your relationship with your parents? How did that shape your relationship with your siblings? And how did that shape who you are today? How did you turn out to be this incredible, strong leader when you went through so much here at this school? And it was what I learned from that experience is that our stories are important. And if you love somebody, you're going to create the space and the time to listen to that person's story.
Most oftentimes our response, especially with our children, is to offer up a piece of advice or counsel or wisdom or deposit, because we see every opening as a chance to invest, pour until they're overflowing, until the next opportunity you have to pour into them. But that's not always the best policy, is it?
No, I have a whole chapter in the book on silencing your inner fixer. And it's not just with your kids, because we tend to do that with our spouses, right? Yes. Your wife or your husband comes home from work and says, I had this problem at work, and you have about a 5-minute window of opportunity, and so you say, well, here's what you should do. Here, let me fix that for you. But that's not what they want. We do that with our kids, and especially with our adult kids. That's not what they want. I use the illustration of my daughters, and when they call me and they say, oh, so-and-so didn't sleep at all last night, the last thing they want to hear from me is a 3-point plan on how to get your kid to sleep through the night. Right. They want empathy and maybe an offer to babysit so that they can take a nap, But as I don't know what it is about our human condition, but we love to give people advice. You see this in churches all the time. Somebody opens up about a problem they're having in their marriage, and we take on the role of a counselor, and all of a sudden we tell them exactly how to fix their problem. The problem is, people don't want us to fix their problems. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like we can validate their feelings and say, wow, that must be hard. That must feel awful. And so we have to learn how to silence our inner fixer.
Was it your daughter who was pregnant that the man came rushing up to?
She was in the grocery store. She was pregnant. It was her first baby, and this man was pushing his cart down the aisle, and he stops and he's like, "Oh, you're pregnant. Now, let me just tell you, you need to get this certain product. I think it's called butt paste, actually. Butt paste for diaper rash, and it works better than any other." And she was like so overwhelmed. She hadn't even thought about diapers yet. She was just getting used to being pregnant, you know. And then my other daughter was at a party, and a person came up that she didn't know and said, "So is Noah sleeping through the night yet?" And she said, "No." And this person was like, "Oh, I have just the answer. You have to read this book and follow this plan." And, you know, she was overwhelmed. She just quietly excused herself and got a drink of punch.
It's amazing what people feel. There's no boundaries when it
Yeah.
comes to conversations. They're probative, they're oversharing.
Yes.
Because they want to tell everything about themselves, they expect you to meet them at that level.
Yes, that's a deep insight.
So you go on in the next chapter to talk about ask great questions. And I think that this is also a way to diffuse or disarm that scenario I just gave you, as putting me in a position where I have to overshare, is by turning a question into a question back.
Yes.
Which keeps them engaged in doing what they like to do best, which is talk about themselves.
Exactly. And I think it's a discipline. We have to practice it. And I think sometimes when I bring up asking good questions, those that are introverted get kind of nervous and think, well, I can't think of questions. But actually, asking questions is an introvert's best friend, because it means that you can steer the conversation without having to share too much yourself. You know, I remember getting ready to go out on a date and saying, what in the world am I going to talk to this guy about? And a friend of mine said, oh, you don't have to worry. Just ask him a few good questions and he'll talk about himself. And you know what? It works. And so when you're tempted to give advice, instead of giving advice, pause for a minute and ask a question. How did that make you feel? Or, wow, you know, what did you do next? Or what do you think you'll do as a result of this problem? Or how can you move beyond this? Because most people can figure out their own problems. They really just want somebody to listen to them.
I think you're exactly right. You go on to talk about offering empathy, which really falls in the category of, you have it, of validating someone else's feelings. I think that's incredibly important. We grow up in a society that tells us that we have to be tougher, we have to do this, we have to do that. This is the right response to that situation. But sometimes people just want to be heard.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, this is why I personally love Jesus so much, because Jesus offered us the greatest empathy by becoming a man and walking literally in our shoes and seeing what we deal with on an everyday basis. And he modeled empathy to the nth degree. You know, at Mary and Martha, when he's at the tomb of Lazarus, he weeps with them. And he knew he was going to raise Lazarus in a few minutes, but he took the time to just cry with them. And I love that. You know, in one of the churches that we served, my husband was the brunt of a very critical bunch of people, and my husband eventually resigned from that church because we felt like we couldn't really minister because it was getting so crazy. And I remember one night, we had 2 teenage daughters living in our home at that time. The other 2 were off in college, and 2 teenage daughters were so angry because they saw all these rumors that people had stirred up about their father that weren't true. And the girls were really angry. And my brother-in-law was there. And he said, you know, girls, I'm just going to let you, I just want to hear whatever you want to say. So I want you to write all your angry feelings down on papers, and I want you to tell me them. And you can say anything you want, and I'm not going to judge you. And he just listened to them for an hour. And at the end, they threw all of their papers in the fire as you know, a commitment. Eventually, they were going to forgive. But for that particular night, they were pretty angry. And my brother-in-law gave the girls a great gift that night, because he allowed them to express their feelings. And he said things like, wow, that would make me angry too. I understand. That makes so much sense to me why you would feel that way. And that's what people are looking for. They don't want you judge their feelings or criticize their feelings or correct their feelings. They want to feel heard. We can't always validate actions, but we can always validate feelings.
No question. I think that people want to be validated more than anything else. They want to know that they matter. They're not just a number, they're not just a statistic, that they actually matter. You talk about body language, but you kind of put it in the category of nonverbals, because that's a little bit larger than just body language. There's several other things that are tells that you're not really engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Body language, I'll be honest. I had to work on this. My face is very readable. So when my teenagers would come home and tell me some things that would go on in a party, I would go, and immediately they would shut down, right? So I learned with my teenagers that the best way to get them to talk was when I was driving in a car with them, because then they couldn't always see my face. And I literally had to practice. I mean, I had to practice in front of a mirror. Like, this is a non-shocked face. This is a calm face. Go on, tell me more. This is a happy face. I mean, I had to practice it. Another signal that we often send people is we cross our arms when they're talking, and a lot of times that can signal that you're defensive. You know, you don't want this attack that's coming at you. And body language covers so many different avenues. I mean, if you're excited about your spouse's promotion, your face should show your excitement. You know, you should act excited. In fact, for children, this is really important. There's a whole part of a child's brain called a joy center. And when you act excited to see them, you're actually, according to science, developing that child's joy center. And they're more able to come back to that in adult life when things are hard for them. And so our body language is really important. I remember hearing Michael Hyatt speak one time, and he said that for a long time he would speak, and he was such an intense speaker. And finally, his agent stood in the back of the room and would make faces at him, like showing him, you got to smile, because otherwise people are intimidated. And I thought that was great.
They actually are. You know, I've experienced that as well. I would go up to people and say to them, are you happy? And they go, yeah. I say, well, you ought to let your face in on the secret.
Yeah, really. I know. You know, every picture that I grew up with as a kid, seeing Jesus, I didn't see him smile. So I really thought, like, maybe Jesus never smiled. And now I think that's crazy. If you read through the gospel, he went to parties. We always have that picture of the little kid sitting on Jesus' lap, right? That's in probably every church across America. And he's so solemn. And I'm guessing that the kids weren't sitting still. They were probably pulling on his beard and getting him to laugh. And he was engaged with them. And so we need to smile and show people that we're happy and excited.
I think when you lock eyes with somebody, when you look them in the eye, they know that you're actually looking at them. You're not looking to the side. You're not digging around your desk for something. You're not engaged. You're giving them 100%.
Yes.
That counseling sessions are always like that, because somebody's coming in to deposit a problem on your lap, something that they're struggling with, and they want to resolve it. They want to really understand it.
Yes.
But during these conflicts, people usually are match strikers on both sides. I lit your fuse, now I'm going to light your fuse, I'm going to light your fuse, and pretty soon we're pushing buttons all over the place and there's no understanding.
Yeah.
Can you resolve a conflict if you don't understand what the root of the conflict is?
No, I think for conflict, again, this was a big learning curve for me. And I'm pretty honest in the book, because I've never been a fan of conflict. And I've handled it wrong probably more times than I've handled it correctly. And so I had to learn some basic skills. I had to learn that, first of all, when I'm in a conflict, oftentimes that means my ability to listen well starts to shut down. And I move into defensive mode, like, for example, your spouse criticizes you, or your kids criticize you, or a coworker criticizes you, and you're thinking through, well, that's not true about me. I don't do that. I do this. And, immediately you're in defensive mode rather than really hearing what they're trying to say. So I had to learn how to stop being defensive in a conflict. I had to learn to allow the other person to fully express what they were trying to say without jumping to conclusions and jumping into fix. I remember when our teenage daughter was having a huge meltdown, and there was a lot going on in her life, AP history, AP English, a rough week with friends, and she was upset with me over something, and I don't honestly even remember what she was upset over, but she started to really just cry and tell me everything that was going wrong, and she was saying, and you did this and you did that, and I just wanted to jump in and defend myself because I kept thinking, I can make this better, I can fix this, and so I would say, well, honey, I didn't mean to do that, and I didn't mean this, and the more I was explaining, the more frustrated she was getting. Finally, praise God, Steve walked in the room, and he just said, Beck, let me take over. And he just held her. She was 17. He just held her in her arms and said, tell me what's frustrating you, and just let her rant and rave. And there's a profound principle in that, because people, when they're upset with you, they cannot be rational. So they can't even begin to rationally understand your line of defense or your line of reasoning. So you may as well just let them completely dump. In fact, a lot of people say that the best response is to just say, tell me more. And then at the end, when they're completely finished, say, I'm going to take some time to think about what you've told me, because I value our relationship and I want to improve.
Sound wisdom. You also talk about toxic people.
Yeah.
And we all know them. I always told the story to my mother that the first time I ever went to a Passover Seder outside my own family's home was when I was in college.
Okay.
And I came home and she said, how was it? And I said, I don't think it was real. And she said, why? I said, because they didn't have an aunt like I do in the kitchen crying the entire time complaining about her husband. They were all completely at peace. So my gauge was on this toxic relative that
Yes.
was always stirring something up, always had something. And they didn't have any of that conflict.
Yeah.
They had no toxicity whatsoever. And I just couldn't understand the family dynamic. Everybody loved each other. They were hugging each other. They were full of joy. And that wasn't the Eastern European home I grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was completely different. So
Yeah.
your advice for dealing with toxic people is to not get sucked in.
Yes. I grew up in a very toxic home, and I had a very broken relationship with my mom, and so sometimes, and that relationship really became very toxic, and it would be like being pulled into a tornado.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I had a counselor tell me, you have to learn how to duck and take cover, because that's what you would do if a tornado was coming. And, sometimes in our lives, there will be toxic people, and we can deal with them by not getting sucked into all the chaos, and so there are some relationships where if they're toxic, it's good to stay in marginal contact if you can, but be careful to not get pulled into that toxicity.
Well, you're so wise in all of this. You then go to a chapter that I think should be at the end of every chapter. It's like the chapter end for every chapter is to let go of distractions.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are such a distracted society, aren't we? I mean, the TV's going. We get Facebook and Twitter and Instagram on our phones. I mean, your phone, when it's on, is constantly dinging. And I didn't have that temptation when I was raising my kids. And I think social media is a wonderful thing because it allows us to get the message of God's love out around the world. But I think we have to limit it a little bit. I know a lot of young moms struggle with this because they're lonely and isolated at home, and I get that. I understand that, and they need to be connecting with their friends on Facebook. But set aside some time where you're just focused on your child, and where you're just listening to them rather than always scanning for the next email. It is interesting to show you the difference in the world today. I was just with my youngest daughter who just had a baby, and she's like, Mom, how did you do this when you had us? Because, you didn't even have Google. You couldn't even Google things while you had infants and say, well, what's wrong with my child now? And so there, all of that is available to us. But what I discover is that a lot of people are very distracted in conversations. Everybody out there has been with a friend at lunch, and that friend is checking text messages or emails when you're trying to have lunch or drink coffee or whatever, or your spouse is scanning email while you're trying to pour out your heart. And we've all done that to other people too. And so I think we need to be aware of it. We need to use the internet as a wonderful creation that God intends us to use, but we need to be careful. We need to be careful to set aside some time each day to really listen to those people that are important to us.
Well, sound advice from Becky Harling. How to listen so people will talk, build stronger communication, deeper connections. At the end of every chapter are exercises for you to be able to listen to God, listen to your heart, and listen to others. And then she gives you a very strong guidance to where to look in Scripture, how to become an engaged, active listener. We thank you, Becky Harling, for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. And I want to encourage you, this is a skill that will be useful to you in every part of your life, whether or not it's work, ministry, talking with God, listening to God, having God talk to you more because you're fully engaged in listening to Him. Isn't that our desire? That we would be transformed by the Word, by the renewing of our minds, and the washing of ourselves with His Word so we can hear clearly what He has to say. It's life-changing advice from Becky Harling, how to listen so people will talk, build stronger communications and deeper connections. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.